a surveyor/lurker of no sleep, reading different stories that have pushed the boundaries of fact and fiction. Some things seem too wacky to be true, and others like you simply wouldn't want them to be true. I am certifying with 100% honesty in an official police report at the end that everything I am about to tell you is the complete and unmodified truth. I was about 4 days from being murdered when my roommates threw me out. Let me clarify a bit. I had just turned 21 and I was living in a tiny Section 8 housing apartment with a couple of friends because I was stupid and felt like I had to be free and avoid responsibility. I did that successfully from the years of 17 to 21, and this story still bugs me to this day because my careless behavior almost led me to being murdered. My 2 roommates were both delinquents. One of them was a drug dealer, and the other was a violent prick who hated anybody smarter than him. For example, myself. None of us had jobs, so the main source of rent and getting food in the house was all us pulling together our combined social resources to get people to buy drugs that were fronted to us by the Mexican gangster living upstairs who called himself Pops. I swear I can't make this shit up. Needless to say, there were a lot of unsavory characters and crazies that came through our place. One was really odd though. His name was Ryan. Ryan was a fucking crazy, pardon my language. He was a spoiled rich dude who constantly came by to buy drugs and then do them with us because he didn't have many others to listen to his fucking insane rambling. He did not like me, not one bit. He believed in this weird universal energy bullshit, backed by math that he figured made sense and off-the-wall pseudo-intellectual theories in a giant notebook with random drawings littering every page. His theory basically said that most human beings draw their energy from different stars and that he drew his energy from the sun, and he was here to bring the light to humanity. Yeah, fucking nuts. He didn't like me and would repeatedly say that I am the dead space in the universe and that I lacked any kind of star energy because I would tell him he was on too many drugs and that he needed to get outside a little bit. One night in particular, I remember vaguely where we conversed on this matter. I simply pretended to agree with him to understand his viewpoint more. Honestly, I wish I fully remembered all of this shit so I could relay it to you. I'd left probably about 2 days after that to go celebrate my birthday with my family, and then we went back to my tiny apartment and got drunk, did something stupid involving lighting something on fire, and got kicked out the next morning, which was a Tuesday. That will be important after this next part. Okay, all of that shit aside, flash forward and I moved back in with my dad, got my shit straight. This is like half a year later when I receive a call from the police asking me to come down to the station. At this point I'm like, what the fuck did I do now? I get there and they start asking me questions about Ryan. Like if I knew him or his parents or had any weird interactions with him, etc. I told them basically what I told you and they said, wow, you're lucky. When I asked why, they showed me a journal entry from the night of our conversation where he said he was going to come back on Friday with a weapon and kill me in my sleep. They had called me there because my name was mentioned, and my roommates had given the police my full name to make sure I was still among the living. He was convicted of the crime of beating both his parents to death prior to me being called, and they were tying up all the loose ends from his insane journal and star signs Bible. For verification purposes, it's not really climatic or anything super frightening, but it scared the shit out of me knowing I was literally days away from being murdered by a psychopath when my roommates threw me out. At the age of 32, it is still hard for me to talk about this. That is why I chose to write about it. This form of communication is much less personal. It has been 23 years since it all took place. In the year of 1994, I was 9 years old. I'm the only child in my family except for the dog we had at the time, Bear. My father is 10 years older than my mother. She was 20 when she gave birth to me and my father was 30. Our small family was close and loving, just as normal as the other families in our middle-class neighborhood. My mother and father worked full-time, so I spent a lot of time after school or during the summer with a babysitter. Always always being with a babysitter wasn't that bad. My babysitter was named Sarah. She lived 4 doors down from us. Sarah had been my babysitter for the past 3 years, so we were quite used to each other. She was basically my older sister. Sarah had turned 18 2 months prior to her high school graduation. Come that July, she would be leaving state to start summer classes at SUU. When my parents told me that Sarah would no longer be my babysitter, I immediately made my case about how I was ready to be without a babysitter. Of course, at that age of 9, my parents protested the idea that I would be unsupervised all summer. "You might be responsible, son, but it is still illegal for us to leave you alone," my father told me. Unfortunately for us, I would eventually get what I wanted. My mother found a new babysitter through a program Sarah told her about. This program was through the school and would give girls ages 15 through 17 a chance to make some money. My mother would give her information and what would be needed from the sitter. The girls that have signed up for the program would pick what job they wanted to take. When my parents got the call that they had me a new babysitter, they were relieved. But on the Monday morning, when my mother actually had to leave me for work, I could tell she was nervous. I was just as nervous and a little upset, if not more. Having to stay at home with a strange person was frightening at that age. Besides, I felt that she was not needed. At 7:55 Monday morning, Rochelle arrived. That day, my mother ordered me to spend some time inside with her so I could get to know her, because she could possibly be here all summer. Being the good boy I was, I did exactly that. The first hour or so was kind of awkward. It consisted of me trying to avoid her by going from room to room as she followed and tried to ask me questions to break the ice. After realizing she would not leave me alone, I caved in and started to answer her. Although most of my answers were short, she was still very nice and always kept a smile on her face. After about an hour or two of getting to know each other, Rochelle let me play some Sega while she did homework. She wasn't as bad as I thought she would be. I learned that she was 16. Rochelle moved to town last summer with her aunt that she lived with. My mother was happy when she learned that all went well and Rochelle and I got along. My mother also promised me that I didn't have to spend all day inside tomorrow. Within 15 minutes of Rochelle's arrival on day 2, I left to ride my bike with my friend Dylan. She just smiled and told me to be safe. I spent all day outside getting home right before my mom and dad got off work. Once again, my parents were happy that the day went well. On day 3, everything started off normal. I was playing some Sega when Rochelle came into my room. "Why don't you want to hang out with me?" she asked. I told her that I was just playing some games and that there was not much else to do. We should get to know each other a little better. I remember looking at her kind of confused. "You and I have a lot more in common than you think," she said, sitting on my bed. I asked her what we could possibly have in common. "It's a secret, but for now let's play a game. We could play house. I will be the older sister, and you could be the little brother." I found it extremely odd that a 16-year-old girl would want to play a game like that with a 9-year-old boy. After about 30 minutes of this odd roleplay, I told her I was bored and wanted to play something else. I remember her looking at me with a furrowed brow and that creepy smile she always wore. We can never stop playing this game. That made me extremely uncomfortable. So I made some 9-year-old excuse and walked out of the room, down the stairs and out the door. There I stayed until my mother got home. When my mother and I walked in together, Rochelle was sitting at the kitchen table doing some sort of homework. When my mother asked how she was doing, Rochelle looked at my mother and I with that smile. "Where's Mr. Gregor?" she asked, referring to my father. My mother must have thought it to be odd that a young girl was asking for her husband, because I could tell that my mom hurried her out of the house. After ushering her out, my mother asked me what I thought of Rochelle. I told her I thought she was weird, and I told her about the game of house she wanted to play. Once again, I saw an opportunity and made my argument on being home alone. Once again, I was denied. On day 4, everything changed. Once my mother left for work, Rochelle asked me if I wanted to go on a bike ride. No matter who she was, being 9, I thought that was a great idea. We rode through my block and down the main road for about a mile. At this point, I didn't know what was going on. It seemed as if she was taking me somewhere. When we finally stopped, we were in front of an apartment. "Want to meet one of my friends?" Rochelle asked me. Without me answering her, she grabbed my hand and led me into the apartment complex. She took me to a door on the second floor and knocked on it. From behind the door, I could hear a man. "Who is it?" "It's me, Rochelle." I could hear the man sigh. "Get out of here. I told you I don't want you around here anymore," the man said from behind the door. "I just wanted to show you my little brother," Rochelle said in a loud voice. "Get the hell out of here, you crazy," the man stated, sounding very annoyed. "My family is real. I told you I had a brother. He's right here. Look, he's real," Rochelle yelled 2 inches away from the door. "Get the hell out of here or I'll call the cops," said the man. At that point, Rochelle pounded on the man's door with both fists. Then she looked at me enraged. Out of nowhere, she just turned and started walking down the hallway back the way she came. I was petrified. It took me a few seconds to realize that she was leaving me. I sprinted to catch up with her. She never said a word when I did catch up. The whole bike ride back home, the both of us were silent. When we got back to the house, I was still shaken up, so I told her I was going to my friend Dylan's house. As I left through the garage door, she said something that has rang in my head to this day. "You're just like your father." That day, I waited at my friend's house till 5:30, which was 30 minutes after my mom got home. When I walked in the door, my mother looked a little disturbed. She told me that when she came into the house, she found Rochelle upstairs in my parents' room laying in their bed. When my mother asked me how the day went, I told her what happened. I told her about riding on the main road that my parents have always forbidden me to do. My mother was furious. She told me to go back to Dylan's house and she would call me home for dinner. When I was finally allowed back home, I was nervous and scared that maybe I was in trouble, but to my relief, I wasn't. My mom told me that Rochelle would no longer be my babysitter and that tomorrow I would be staying with Mr. and Mrs. Charles, an older couple across the street. Once again, I made my case about being home alone. On morning 5, I sat at Mr. and Mrs. Charles' house almost all day. They were nice enough, but could not keep a 9-year-old entertained. Around 1 p.m., Mr. Charles was getting ready for a nap, and I asked Mrs. Charles if I could run home real quick to get a toy to play with. Reluctantly, she agreed, knowing that my mother told her not to let me leave, but she could tell I was dying of boredom. When I got into the house, I was kind of scared knowing that I was all alone. I ran upstairs immediately to my room. When I opened the door, I was startled to see Rochelle in my room. She was wearing that creepy smile again. She lunged forward and grabbed me. Being scared and 9 years old, I didn't know what to do. Rochelle pulled out some rope she found in our garage. She tied up my hands behind my back and tied my feet to my bedpost. After she realized I wasn't going anywhere, she relaxed a bit. She pulled out a small pocket knife from one of her pockets. For the next 3 hours, she proceeded to explain to me that my dad was also her dad. Between her crying and pacing back and forth, she said that our dad left her mother when Rochelle was born from my mom. Rochelle kept telling me that I took her family and that I was the reason she couldn't be happy, but I would pay. We would just have to wait for our dad to get home so he knows what he has done. I was absolutely horrified. I couldn't yell, fight, or scream for help. All I could do is cry. I thought that I was going to die by this girl and her pocket knife. After sitting tied up for several hours, I thought all was hopeless. While Rochelle was sitting on my bed with a blank stare in between her crying, I could hear what I thought was the sound of someone walking up the stairs. La Palma Police, is anyone upstairs? That exact moment, Rochelle snapped up. I screamed louder than I ever have in my whole life. While I screamed for help, Rochelle climbed behind me and put the knife to the side of my face. I could feel her heavy breath on the back of police officer turned the corner of my room with his gun out and looked at the both of us. I could see the change in his face when he realized the situation. He slowly put his gun back in its holster. "Okay, what's going on here?" asked the policeman. Already crying, Rochelle screamed, "I just want my family." About 20 minutes went by with the policeman trying to calm Rochelle down. When 2 more cops showed up, Rochelle's attitude changed. She got more aggressive and was at this point pushing the blade into the meat of my arm. All I could do was cry and whimper for help. In between arguing with the police, crying and waving the knife around, she would whisper to me, "It'll all be over soon." Without realizing, one of the cops moved into a position to where he could tase and subdue her without me getting hurt. The rest of the night I don't quite remember. All I can see is Rochelle being tackled to the floor. I remember my mom and dad crying when I was cut free and on my way to the hospital for stitches. I had to get 6 stitches. My parents never talked about that summer, probably in hopes that it would be forgotten, but I can never forget what happened to me. At the age of 18, I asked my dad what he could remember about that night. I could tell he was uncomfortable about telling me, but I told him I was old enough. What he told me made the whole situation worse. He said that the babysitter, Rochelle's real name, was Amanda. Her mother died in a house fire a year prior to us meeting her. Amanda was nowhere to be found and was reported missing after the fire. She was the only suspect they had for the house fire. Her father did in fact leave her mother when she was born, but died in a car accident shortly afterwards. She was never actually related to my family. It was just a complete mental breakdown. Mrs. Charles had dozed off after I went to get a toy. When she woke up 2 hours later, she remembered me. When the cops showed up to my house, the front door was left open. This really freaked me out because none of us could have avoided this. This Amanda girl was going to lose it eventually, and it just happened to be with me and my family. She is locked up now and serving life in some sort of mental institution for the murder of her mother. The hardest part of all this is the fact that I now have a 9-year-old. He's the only child other than our dog Odin. My wife and I work full time, but with our long-term babysitter quitting for a real job, I'm not sure what to do. After the summer of '94, my parents felt that I no longer needed a babysitter. Do I leave my 9-year-old home alone all summer, or do I find a stranger to watch him? When I first became a 911 operator, I thought it was the coolest job. I had always wanted to be a cop, but one thing kept me from doing so. I'm partially blind. I figured if I couldn't help people by protecting them from criminals, I might as well help people in the only other way I could: dispatching. I quickly realized that this job was not for the faint-hearted. The hardest calls were the ones that ended abruptly. You would sit there for the rest of the night, or sometimes for a full week, wondering what happened. In smaller cities, information gets passed around and dispatchers are usually let in on the end result of the dispatch, but for me, in a city of over 200,000 people, there are so many calls made that there's never enough time to ask the question of what happened. Mondays, Fridays, and Sundays were the busiest days. The most terrifying and unusual calls were made on those days. Here are some of the more intense phone calls I've received. For confidentiality reasons, the names used in this are made up. In my last post, I didn't really give much detail about my hours of work and whatnot, so I'll elaborate. I'm in my 5th year of dispatching. I'm an overnight dispatcher, meaning my shift starts at 7 p.m. and runs through till 7 a.m. The odd time I work during the day, but that's only when I'm training someone, usually. I work 5 days on and then I have 5 days off. They do this because it's pretty exhausting staying up for 12 hours straight every night, but also because you get so mentally drained by the end of the 5th day that it almost becomes unbearable to answer distress callers. Although I have to admit, I'm getting much better at numbing my own feelings when people call. But every now and again there's a call that can't just be numbed. I was also asked if it gets weirder on certain days, like a full moon or stuff like that. The answer is yes. People who are very superstitious like to call on those days. Same with people who are into the paranormal. People get into a lot of shenanigans on those days and end up getting hurt or worse. My question is, why can't people just stay home on full moons? The strangest phone call I've ever received on a full moon was in my first few weeks of working there, actually.
911, what's your emergency? Yes, hello? Are you there? Yes, ma'am, what's your emergency? There's someone outside my home. Someone is impersonating my husband. Okay, I'm sending the dispatch now. Can you tell me your name? Are you home alone? Linda. My name is Linda. I live alone. My husband passed away 3 years ago.
Her breathing started to sound panicked.
Okay, Linda, it's going to be okay. Police will be there in less than 5 minutes. Where are you right now? Oh my lord, he sounds just like him.
Her breathing got ragged and started to sob.
Linda, where is he? He's at the tree line. He's asking to come see him. I can't see what he looks.
I heard the sound of a patio door opening.
Linda, please stay inside. Police will be there any minute. But what if it's my husband? I just need to see. He never came back home from hunting. Maybe he found his way back.
She sounded hopeful, and I could hear the crunch of leaves as she walked closer to what I'm guessing was the tree line.
No, Linda, please listen to me. You said your husband died 3 years ago, right?
My own breathing was becoming heavy.
Gary, is that you, sweetheart? Are you there? You've been gone for so long, oh my god.
There was a sound of commotion, and then I heard the sound of her running.
That's not my... His face is so...
Linda let out a blood-curdling scream and then silence.
Linda! Linda, are you there?
Screaming into the phone until I heard the sound of heavy breathing, and then the line was cut. A few days after that phone call has been made, there was a story on the news about a woman found dead in her backyard. Her legs had been ripped off her body and her neck snapped. Police suspected that she had fallen and broken her neck and that an animal like a wolf or a coyote had eaten her legs.